World Insight you're watching, and we are coming to you from Beijing. China has just celebrated its most important holiday of the year, but this time around, it wasn't alone. The Lunar New Year festivities began last week, and each year around 700 million viewers tune in to watch the ever-popular Spring Festival Gala on state-run television CCTV, this home organization that I work for. So how many is that? Combine the viewers of Oscar, Emmys, and American Idol finales, and Super Bowl, and you are not even close. But this year, the year of the sheep, viewers from around the world were given the chance to join in the celebration of one of the world's biggest annual parties.
Sharing the celebrations. This year, China's state-run broadcaster CCTV showed its Spring Festival Gala in New York City's Times Square for the very first time to send Chinese New Year greetings to the West on February 12th.
I'm an entertainer myself, and I have an appreciation for what goes into it, and so I don't think we have anything quite like that. That's beautiful. I'd love to see that here in America.
The gala was also broadcast around the world on YouTube, Google and Twitter. It's a colourful variety show that's been around since 1983. It's seen by many as an important part of the Chinese New Year. In recent years, the Chinese New Year has made inroads into the American mainstream. It's now noted in sports broadcasts and even beverage packaging. The cultural push coincides with a campaign by the Chinese government to bolster the country's still limited soft power, warming the international image of the emerging and once isolated Asian power. Since 2010, the country's Ministry of Culture has organised New Year events worldwide. Back then, authorities ran 65 activities in 42 countries. This year, the government tallied 900 events in 119 nations. South Korean broadcaster KBS this year featured a special series called Super China. The documentary won ratings of over 10%, much higher than the average. The New Year party is now over for another year, but it's unlikely Beijing's latest soft power push will change China's image overnight. There can be little doubt, though, that China is positioning itself front and centre on the world's cultural stage to coincide with its economic rise.
And welcome back. For more on this about the Chinese Lunar New Year being celebrated around the world, what does it mean? How is it related to China's soft power? We are joined in the studio in Beijing, Professor Shi Anbing, who is from Tsinghua University. Professor, welcome to our program. Meanwhile, from New Haven inside the United States, we are joined by Ms. Nancy Yao Basbach. She is the president of the Museum of Chinese in America. And also in Ithaca of the U.S., we have Mr. Philip Cunningham. He's an independent scholar. Well, welcome to our program and happy Spring Festival to all of you, because we are still in the month of the festivity. Thank you very much. 新年快乐 to all of you. Let me ask you, Professor, first. We see so many are joining Chinese these days around the world to celebrate the Spring Festival. How much is that, do you think, we can read about the soft power that China has related to this?
I think so far the Spring Festival celebration is still what I call the first layer of Chinese culture, or the outer layer of Chinese culture. We all know that this is a festival belong to China, but we still lack the understanding of the core value of exactly what that is mean to Chinese people. I think in the United States, it will celebrate many festivals, including Mexico or Ireland or many other nationalities. So this is a kind of Chinese festival that they celebrate, but what exactly means still not understood by many people around the world.
So you don't think it is that significant? Is that what you're saying?
I would say we still need more work to let people know what exactly means of this Chinese New Year.
Right. Well, maybe this is also the work of Mr. Basbach, since she is running this Museum of Chinese in America. Do you think the true meaning, the different layers of cultures and traditions of Chinese reflected in the Spring Festival are being understood while people are celebrating with us, whether in Times Square or in Hawaii?
I think there's great reception to the Chinese culture, and not just the Chinese culture that the Chinese government in a public diplomacy format offers to the world, but also in the people, the one-on-one interactions, the culture that really transforms and morphs from individual to individual, from generation to generation. As you know, the U.S. has had immigrants from many, many different places where Chinese people have lived, not only from China, but also from Southeast Asia, from Brazil, from many other places. So those cultures have changed and morphed. But as far as the understanding of the traditional Chinese culture and really the Lunar New Year celebration that Chinese celebrate, I think there are quite a few dimensions and depth to that understanding as far as the foods. Like the foods. I think many Chinese people have shared their culture,
the foods,
why they eat dumplings during the Chinese New Year.
What else? Dumplings every year, but what else? Is there, when you are talking about layers, when people are enjoying the dumplings, are they asking further questions? Is there curiosity?
Absolutely. It's such a joyful holiday, so I think anything that's so positive is an attraction. And that's really what soft power is. It's an attraction to the people, as Professor Joe Nye had established in the article in 2005. The magnet that draws people into one's culture is truly soft power. And food, dancing, celebration, all of those are very attractive.
Exactly. But as both of you have already mentioned, the festivities are always enjoyable, whichever culture they are coming from. And we are also helping them to celebrate here in China. But the question is, besides this celebration, are people willing to go one step further after the celebration comes to an end to understand China? This is probably a bigger reflection of whether people are interested in your culture or in your country. Mr. Cunningham, I know you've been living in China and other parts of Asia, so you probably are tricultured, shall I say. What is your understanding of these layers that Americans have or others around the world have toward the Chinese culture, if I could use a simplified word like the Chinese culture?
Okay, well, I think that, Chinese New Year is big. I used to live in Japan, and Japanese New Year is the most important holiday there, too. And in the United States, perhaps the most comparable holiday would be Thanksgiving. And in all three of these cases, it's really not something that the government needs to promote, in my mind, or even benefits much from promoting, because it's really about family. I mean, you look at these holidays, and this is a time of year when people, wherever they are, whatever they're doing, they try and stop, hopefully get a few days off from work, rush home and have a good meal with the family and friends. And I think that's the essence of Chinese New Year. I think that's the essence of it. It's as it manifests itself in other countries and other New Year celebrations and Thanksgiving rituals and so on.
Let me come back.
So I think it's, it's icing on the cake to promote it, but I think it's really a personal family holiday.
Exactly. Let me come back to you, Professor Shi, because you've also been giving advice to the Chinese who are thinking about promoting soft power overseas. Mr. Cunningham says something very interestingly. That is, do you really need to make an effort so that others understand your culture or get closer to your culture, particularly the role of the government here?
I think in regard to now the China's rising power and also its position in the world, we have to notice that now we really have a kind of the coming of Chinese century, actually predicted by many Western media. So Spring Festival celebration provides occasion for Chinese government to actually to promote this kind of core value of Chinese culture that I have been talking about previously. So this is particularly a kind of maneuver. The government should use this kind, what we call the charm offensive, to actually draw attention and also increase its attraction as the previously discussed in our program. So this is really an important public diplomacy maneuver.
This is a lot of strategy and a lot of specific terminologies you've been using, Professor Shi, of course, coming from your academic background. On the other hand, Ms. Masbach, many would wonder, what is the relations then between organizations like yours, among Chinese communities, trying to promote the Chinese culture all over America, and government efforts coming here from China, from Beijing? What exactly is the relations between these two? How they are working towards one another, or actually they're actually working on very different paths? And what does that mean for Chinese soft power, if I could use still that big word?
Absolutely. It's such a wonderful question. I think we're working in very harmonious ways, if you will. But I think what the Museum of Chinese in America in particular is sensitive to is respecting other cultures as well. So in the U.S., it's actually quite prevalent and quite accepted to call it the Lunar New Year. Therefore, respecting that Koreans and Vietnamese and other people who are immigrants or citizens, come to this country for a long time, also celebrate the Lunar New Year. So when someone says a Chinese New Year, in fact, it's considered slightly provincial, that we would only relegate it to one group of people, and therefore it creates some sort of uncomfortableness.
Right.
So the Chinese government in itself, coming with the Confucius Institutes, sharing the Chinese language, I think that's very, very well received. I guess what I would suggest is it's not always easy to make a significant investment in soft power without the proper due diligence. So in the sense that understanding what is the reception of and what format is it most received to learn Chinese language?
Right. Let me get back to
teachers that are select. Yeah.
Right. Let me get back to Professor Shi on that point. I think Ms. Masbach was talking about the inclusiveness, in a way, of a festival. The inclusiveness of incorporating everybody with us to celebrate our values and cultures, and the cultures and values also shared by many others, including many of our Asian neighbors. So what do you think about this point?
I think the inclusiveness is exactly one of the core values that Chinese traditional culture might be inherited from. So what I'm saying, this globalization of this celebration of Chinese Spring Festival is a kind of platform to enhance its core value. Not only because the money, Chinese people now become rich and we can travel all around to spend money, but also this core value should become a way that Chinese people can engage the world in the rest of the century.
And what China can contribute to the rest of the world as well. Let me get back to you, Mr. Cunningham. One important issue we haven't talked about, which is what are we celebrating about? Is it about the contemporary China, or is it about the traditional Chinese culture? Which do you think is the strongest point of the so-called Chinese soft power? I hate to use this very political terminology, but obviously that's a way people describe it. Mr. Cunningham.
Well, I'm interested in the term soft power. When I was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard, I talked about this with Joe and I, and we met with many Chinese guests, and I think he's a big believer in it, but I think it's sometimes misunderstood to be culture in the kind of museum sense or in the superficial sense. And soft power really is much deeper than that. It gets down to values. So what are the values you have, and are you living a life, and is the government consistent with its own values? And I think when it comes to values, China's in a very good position because you've got thousands of years of history where you have values that, for lack of a better term, come under the umbrella of Confucianism or Taoism or Buddhism, but you have lots of family values and values of decency and helping people.
Absolutely.
And people in the village.
So what are you saying?
So
is it contemporary culture or is it traditional culture? That's the strongest point.
Well, I'll get to that, Tammy, if you don't mind.
Okay, go ahead.
So what you fast forward to the current era, and even in the communist days, basically the things that worked best under communism were things that were resonant and harmonious with China's very long culture. So, for example, concepts of people helping one another, mutual aid, and the kind of egalitarian ethos. I think that is a value of communism that can still be embraced even in this sort of post-communist world we live in. The idea of women, this is rather radical. This is a break with tradition, but it's also very much worth celebrating, is communism introduced the liberation of women.
Well,
and having women fully participate in the country's life and marketplace and everything.
There actually is so much layer that we are talking about if it is a Chinese culture. And of course, we're having a socialism with Chinese characteristics. That's probably the most correct way of describing the Chinese society. But let me get back to you, Mr. Masbach, about that. Contemporary China, traditional China. Which are you proud of? And do you think we really understand it, our own tradition? Briefly, if you can.
I don't think we fully understand it. I think what we're experiencing today and in Times Square is traditional plus contemporary, in the sense that the 100 years for Chinese history and all the different movements to the U.S., to other countries, the immigration policies across the board, they have created a very distinct culture. So in the U.S., many Chinese Americans will claim and be very proud that they have a more traditional Chinese culture. And that's implying that because of the government change in 1949, that potentially that those traditional cultures may have somehow been lost. So that's a very pride and proud moment for Chinese in the U.S. But I would suggest that the precision, the orchestration, the large numbers of arts that's being exported now in Times Square, in those areas, that's so incredibly contemporary China. So we're combining the traditional, which is of more Confucian influence, with the contemporary of what China is today, and the precision and just the ability to present in a way that is very new.
All right. Can we be precise, though? Do we really understand what our history was like, what our culture was like, and did we present it in the correct way or precise way, as Ms. Masbach just said?
I would say this is actually require kind of deconstructing the dichotomy between traditional and so-called modern China. Recently, the publication of Xi Jinping's work has been very popular in China and in the West. I think the current leadership's effort is to bridge the dichotomy between the traditional and the contemporary China.
Well, it is not just the politicians who are working in that direction. I hope the public will also work very hard, such as academics like you. But we want to thank the three of you for coming over to this round of discussion. Time is very limited when you talk about 5,000 or even more than that years of culture in China. But we thank you for your input. Thank you so much. We want to express our appreciation, Mr. Shan Bing. Happy New Year to you, Ms. Nancy Masbach, and also Mr. Philip Cunningham. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. 新年快乐 to all of you.
新年快乐.